Okay, guys, so I think we can start. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Globsec press conference, which today will be all about vulnerability of 8 European countries. And we'll be talking more about Russia and China influence on our countries, including Slovakia. The study examined 5 dimensions, and colleagues from Democracy and Resilience will tell you more about the research. Please welcome here Dominika Hajdu, Katarina Klingova, and Miroslava Saviris. So please, you can start.
Thanks, Adam. Thank you very much for coming and listening to what we have basically found and the results of our work, which took over 6 months to complete. So what the vulnerability index measures basically is the vulnerability of 8 countries towards foreign malign influence, with a particular focus on Russia and China. So these are the countries that we are covering. It's Bulgaria, Czech Republic, Hungary, Montenegro, North Macedonia, Romania, Serbia, and Slovakia. And basically, we have analyzed and summarized the index into 5 overarching dimensions. First one is public attitudes. So we have measured what people think and whether there are any vulnerabilities towards foreign influence in this arena. Then we have looked at the political landscape. So basically, what do political entities say and do, and whether what they do and say helps the country to be more resilient, or whether it feeds into the vulnerability. Then we looked at public administration, so basically about the country responses. We also looked at the information landscape, because we know that this plays ever increasing role in either feeding into the resilience of a given country or into its vulnerability. And obviously we also looked at social media. And the final dimension is the civic and academic space. So basically we looked at the overarching resilience of a civic sector, the conditions that the civil society exists in, as well as the academia. So the results are basically measured on a scale between 0, which represents an ideal sort of resilience, which obviously no country can really achieve, and then vulnerability, which equates with 100, representing an absolute vulnerability, basically. So across all of these 5 dimensions, you can essentially check the numbers. And now a bit in terms of what is the data composition of this index, because obviously this is not something that we have just kind of made up. We included Globsec Trends 2020 opinion poll surveys. These are representative public opinion poll surveys in each country. We have included expert surveys with at least 20 experts in each country. We have included desk research by us and partnering organizations, which is covering years 2016 and 2021. And finally, we have also used expert interviews. And we used a number of external sources also to feed into our index, again covering years 2016 until basically now, because we wanted to have a broader understanding of the trends in a given country and not just a snapshot of one year or 2. So we have looked at variables of democracy index, which feeds into certain dimensions, corruption perception index, world press freedom index, and civil society sustainability index. And we can move to the next slide. So overall, we have 77 variables. So these are different data points collected for all of these years. These feed into the 31 indicators, and those 31 indicators subsequently create the 5 dimensions which I have already spoke about. So overall, we have 8,000 respondents in public opinion poll surveys. We have 355 experts that we have surveyed as part of the expert surveys. 26 analysts were involved in this whole research project. We have assessed 97 political entities across the region, and we have also analyzed 128 security strategies and reports studied. So as you can see, this is quite a large data set that we have been working with. And in terms of where you can find the details about the methodology, if you're interested, we also have a website, which Domi will later show, and there is a whole section on methodology, which basically explains in the detail how we have composed the index and which data sources go into which dimension.
Oh, okay. So these are the overall results that we have. I mean, this is the overall score for the vulnerability index, where you see that the Czechia, closely followed by Romania, are the most resilient. On the other hand of the spectrum is Serbia with 55 points in our vulnerability score, making it the most vulnerable country out of the 8 countries that we analyzed. Here are some key regional observations. They're very broad, but these are the things that we observed across all the countries. So in 5 out of 8 countries, the public attitudes are the main points of vulnerability. Really, it goes to belief in disinformation, distrust in democracy. In many countries, it's a pan-Slavic, unity or belief of pan-Slavic unity. And in 6 out of 8 countries, really pro-Kremlin narratives, whether of this pan-Slavic unity or disinformation, resonate. When it comes to political landscape, we found out that there is a homogeneous commitment across political elites, especially when they're in the coalitions to be part of the EU and NATO, and they're very pro-Euro-Atlantic. However, we can divide the countries into 3 groups. On one scale of the spectrum, there's Romania, Czechia, and Slovakia, whose leaders are very Euro-Atlantic oriented, the membership of these countries in these international organizations are not going to be questioned. On the other hand of the spectrum is Serbia, where huge, where public representatives openly question the possibility of membership of the country in these international organizations, and are very pro-Kremlin, pro-Beijing oriented. An interesting thing is that which we've observed across all the countries is that Moscow and Beijing have a really strong economic pool, and this idea of cooperating with these countries based on economic relationships is widespread among all the countries, but that pool differs a bit from country to country. Another thing which we observe when it comes to regional findings is that public administration has a very low situational awareness and has underdeveloped capacities when it comes to fighting foreign influence. There's outdated legislation which doesn't cover online space. There's a very limited awareness to Beijing's activities, which is really predominant only in Czechia, and in other countries is still being risen. Another place, please. When it comes to information landscape, one thing that is common is the mainstreamization of disinformation of information landscape. What do we mean about it? More and more political leaders eventually use disinformation and Kremlin propaganda to appeal to their voters, and thus it gets to the mainstream. There's increasing attempts of state capture, increasing attempts of control public broadcasters. Well, what we've observed is also that the presence of disinformation correlates with the presence of influence of pro-Kremlin actors. So the more disinformation you have, the information landscape, the bigger the vulnerability, the bigger the presence of pro-Kremlin actors in that information landscape. When it comes to the final dimension, civic space, we found out that in 5 out of the 8 countries, civic space is highly politically polarized. There's a huge demonization of CSOs and smear campaigns being led by and including by various political actors. There's a low funding available in many countries for existence of civil society organizations, and in many countries we also observed establishment of gongos, meaning government organized NGOs, and increasing restrictions on academic freedom, for example, in Serbia or in Hungary.
And now we'd like to pass on the words to Jonas, our partner from the Czech Republic. Jonas, the floor is yours.
Yeah, well, good morning. Thank you very much for taking part in this presentation, and thank you very much to Globsec team for having us on the board in this very interesting and comprehensive project. So basically, as it was already said, you can see on the table that the Czech Republic performs quite well, actually, maybe not better than we from the Czech Republic would admit. So with score 29 being the most resilient out of the, together with Romania, out of the analyzed countries, you can see that the highest vulnerability lies in public attitudes with 0.45 points, and the lowest in the public administration with 19 points. Of course, like those figures are a bit flat, so I definitely encourage you to look into the report and we can try to describe a bit what is behind these numbers, and I will try to summarize the main findings just now. So, if I may ask about the next slide, please. Yes, so if you take a look at the Czech Republic and the situation, basically you cannot avoid the temptation to actually to tell it, not compartmentalize it into different areas, but actually to tell it as a story. Because really, in the last 5 years in Czech Republic, we can see quite interesting case study of the let's say of the attempts of authoritarian countries to get more influence, and the pushback against these attempts. And we go back to 2016, you will see the political elite, which is quite sympathetic to, let's say, discover various potential for developing partnership, mainly with China, but also in some respects to Russia. And this, of course, opens the floor to these actors to kind of manifest their influence. However, at the same time, we can see the strong, let's say, resentment against this from the civil society, which is very active in thematizing the issues like disinformation, information operations, and such like. We can see attempts of state institutions to, let's say, accommodate itself to new security environment by issuing various strategies and developing like new capabilities. And of course, we can see that political opposition takes the topics of influences from authoritarian states and turn it into some sort of domestic issues. And this going hand in hand with sometimes clumsy and not really well thought through actions of authoritarian states leads us to today's, which is basically the fact that the space for these countries to maintain their influence in the Czech Republic remains to be limited, and I don't think that the Czech Republic at this point, especially after the results of election 2021, has quite a lot of opportunities to improve its score against the ratings we currently. But I think that one very key thing we did is that we didn't focus only on the foreign influence as such, but we tried to find out how this influence is enabled by systemic problems that are present in our countries. And just to name a few, which I think will be quite challenging for next political representation of Czech Republic overcome. Definitely from our study, what we could see, like the very low level of trust of population towards institutions and Eurosceptic attitudes, which were quite clearly manifested. This kind of high level of vulnerability among the public. Definitely, another area is that despite the fact that we are having a lot of, let's say, strategic documents that are tackling this issue and institutions that are dedicated should do this as their main job, they are still, let's say, lacking in the fulfillment of the set goals. And we can see that there is still insufficient level of coordination among state institutions and civil society. And last but not least, even though that it doesn't seem to be the case at this point. Still, we should very closely observe the public broadcast, because as we kind of made a comparison with the other countries, the strong position of the Czech public broadcast seemed to be very important for increasing the resilience of Czech information space against disinformation. But of course, this can be very easily, very easily problematized in the case that politicians try to kind of interfere or contact public broadcast, which up to this point kind of maintain this or like survive this attempt, but for future we will see. So that was a brief overview to the Czech Republic, and I hand the word back to you, to Bratislava, and looking forward for the further discussion.
Thanks a lot, Jonáš. Patrick, you can go next. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. I also wanted to thank you for involving us in this project and for the invitation. So as you probably saw earlier, Hungary was found to be the least resilient country among EU member states during this project, at least among the EU member states that we surveyed. And if you look at this graph compared to that of the Czech Republic, where public attitudes meant the main vulnerability on the Hungarian chart, you can see that it's basically public attitudes, political landscape, public administration, information landscape are all on a relatively high level, and that civic level and that civic and academic space is even higher. So in the case of Hungary, what we see is not that there is a sort of vulnerability that starts from the grassroots level. It's rather a vulnerability that starts with the top level, the political and possibly economic elite. If you can look at the next slide, I'm going to talk about a bit more in detail about the various subcategories. So in terms of public resilience, we can see resilience on the surface only, which this means that basically Hungarians are highly supportive of EU membership and NATO membership, so they do not believe in the programming narratives that it might be better to live outside of these structures. But if we look at more specific narratives, the picture overall is far more concerning. So for instance, if we talk about the narrative that the EU only dictates to Hungary what it should do without Hungary having any sort of input on that, support for that is relatively high, especially among the supporters of the current ruling Fidesz party. Or if you just look at narratives such as the West is provoking Russia, support for that is also relatively high. So when we go to the specifics, this sort of resilience on the surface partly evaporates. In terms of the political landscape, we can say this based on the expert surveys we conducted as well. The current ruling parties are strong representatives of some Russian and Chinese interests in the country. They disseminate very positive narratives on both Russia and China, while parallelly they attack not just Western values, but the Western structures, particularly the EU that Hungary is a member of. And although there are extra parliamentary actors who openly favor leaving EU and leaving NATO, they are not particularly important currently in the Hungarian political scene. So it's mainly the government narrative that might affect the population. If we look at just a public policy example, we can see that Hungary is cooperating with China on large-scale projects such as the Budapest-Berlin Railway, or with Russia on Box 2. And these projects are being touted as efforts that would bring massive economic benefits to Hungary. And this sort of transactional narrative is based on the focus group discussions that we had. They are rather popular with the Hungarian people. They also do believe that the economic relationship with these countries could benefit Hungary, while it might actually not be the case if we look at the structures of these projects. In terms of public administration, the issue is that there is little room for maneuver for the lower levels of public administration to act independently to counter foreign influence. They are basically fulfilling the task given to them by their superiors, who are mostly party loyalists. So the public administration can provide a sort of balance to governmental policies, and the main issue that Hungary has with countering foreign influence is that as long as there is a strongly policed government in place, there are no independent initiatives that could sort of bring a pro-Western viewpoint into the attention of the public. In terms of media, we have a fairly large pro-government media empire whose main task is disseminating the messages of the government uncritically, and so they are the main source of positive Russia and China coverage in this country. Naturally, there are alternative fringe pro-Kremlin and pro-Beijing media in Hungary, but their main task is basically highlighting the narratives that do not make their way into pro-government media, such as Crimea is Russian. So due to this unique characteristic of Hungary, at least among the EU countries surveyed, the Kremlin and Beijing make little effort to penetrate the media environment, which paradoxically, in terms of a change of government or a change of the media environment, it could actually become an advantage to Hungary, because then the Kremlin and Beijing would have to start their media presence or start building their media presence from almost the ground up in Hungary. And in terms of our last category, we can say that independent civic and academic space in Hungary is shrinking constantly. Independent civic society has been a target of attacks for quite a few years now, and there is sort of a parallel structure made up of gongos, Hungary, as it has been mentioned before. While in the academic space, the Hungarian government has extended its control over the majority of universities in Hungary through public benefit foundations, and the party loyalists who are sitting on these boards. And it also has its own sort of educational institution, the Matthias Corvinus Collegium, which could be used to disseminate governmental foreign policy preferences. And another potential concern that we've heard from our experts during the interviews is that there is a Chinese expansion in the academic sphere through Confucius institutes, and also the Freedom project that the Hungarian government is planning together with China. And this is what I want to say. So I'm gonna send the word back to Bratislava. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Patrick. Well, the last country that we cover today is Slovakia. As you can see, Slovakia falls into one of the findings that Katerina already mentioned, that public attitudes is actually the most vulnerable dimension for Slovakia as well. This means public perceptions, how they see the world. And the other dimensions are more or less similar, between 25 to 33 points out of 100, with civic and academic space, and perhaps to some the political landscape being most resilient in Slovakia, and I'll just tell you why. So for Slovakia, Slovakia has several strengths and also vulnerabilities within same dimensions. So, for example, in Slovakia, civil society is relatively free to operate. I hope we're a good example of that. We have also freedom to funding and freedom of opinion, and this actually creates a resilience. Also, the academic freedom is very well developed in Slovakia, although the quality of the academia is perhaps not always regarded as high in the country, it is free to operate. This means that it is resilient to Russian and Chinese influence. Also, we have free and quality media. And this is a huge resilience and huge plus for Slovakia when it comes to foreign influence. Also, politicians overall are very pro-EU and pro-NATO, especially when they are in power. So we compared, of course, we analyzed all key parties in the Slovak environment for the past 6 years. So we actually got a lot of parties in opposition and coalition. And once the political representatives came from opposition to the coalition, often they also changed their rhetoric to being more pro-EU and pro-NATO, which consequently means that actually their influence on foreign policy was very pro-EU and pro-NATO when they were in power, meaning that they actually got the points for being resilient. Also, for the past years, our resilience has grown thanks to the adoption of our new strategic documents after 16 years, which mentions China and Russia as challenges. And overall, the public administration has moved forward in creating a more resilient state in terms of identifying hybrid threats and foreign influence as challenges. At the same time, political landscape is also a vulnerability in a sense that the disinformation has been politicized. That our political representatives are using disinformation to score political points, which is then presented in the media because, of course, you know, what is happening on the political scene has to be presented in the media, which makes our information space specifically vulnerable to pro-Kremlin and pro-Chinese influence. Because, as also Katerina mentioned, usually what we call this disinformation or spread of conspiracy theories means that it is in line with pro-Kremlin interests because this disinformation is trying to subvert the state institutions, or our membership in the EU or NATO. So this is a key vulnerability. Another vulnerability is that political entities, and this is mostly for the future, are mostly mentioning China in economic terms. In terms of economic cooperation, only very few representatives, including both presidents in the past 6 years, and current Minister of Foreign Affairs, mentioned China in terms of the violation of human rights and challenges it poses to our country. From the technological and other aspects of their influence. Why is this dangerous? Because it also creates some image in people's minds of China not being a threat, of China only being there as some kind of economic partner, or perhaps also competitor, but people are not very aware of what China actually represents and what the vulnerability from China can be. So this leads to public attitudes, which are actually our weakest point. And you've been probably noticing this because we've done a lot of Globsec trends in the past, but this shows that our population specifically is more prone to believe in conspiracy theories and disinformation, larger than in other V4 countries. We're more sympathetic to Russia, and as I mentioned earlier, we are more unaware of what actually China is doing, and we don't perceive China as a threat. And last but not least, while public administration is moving forward and we are actually getting better, we still lack in cyber capacities, and this presents a large vulnerability for Chinese and Russian influence. So in short, that we're looking forward to your questions. Czech and Slovak colleagues, feel free to ask the questions in our native languages if it's easier for you to work with that. And that's that. Thank you for your attention.
Website.
Oh, and yeah, sorry. We also have a website that we would like to show you, which you can actually very easily scroll through. Just a second. I'm not sure if you can see this, but if you go to vulnerabilityindex.org, we created this interactive website where you can explore the vulnerabilities yourself. Here you can see all the vulnerabilities of the countries that we covered. You can use the filters to see numbers. You can check the dimensions here. You can actually click on the countries and read the summary for each of the countries. This is an interactive tool of how you can explore these vulnerabilities, also read some very specific points. As you can see, the reading time here is 2 minutes, 1 minute, so it's not very timely to read. You can also compare countries that you're interested in. You can choose up to 3 countries here, and of course download everything that you need onto your computers. So now that's that, and we're looking forward to your questions.
Okay, if I can start as I'm sitting here. One question I think it might be also for our guest from Czech Republic and Hungary. I know this is maybe not totally within this study, but I think it's kind of related. And I would like maybe to ask about how, if you are talking about resilience and how those countries are resilient against the influence of Russia and China, if we look at the whole disinfo ecosystem, how much big disinfo campaigns are driven by outside actors, and how much are they driven by, let's say, the internal actors? I think that we can see in the past few years a couple of quite successful disinfo campaigns. We can talk about, I don't know, EU migration pay, we can talk about Istanbul Convention, of course, anti-vax. So, and maybe it's different and I would take the opportunity of, we have the guests here, that maybe it's different in some other countries, but maybe in the framework of these studies, how much are those things driven by outside actors, or how much are those things driven by internal actors, how this ecosystem looks in a countries, in Slovakia, in Czech, in Hungary. Jedna otázka, ktorá sa týka len Slovenska, tak ju položím po slovensky. To skôre slovenských politikov, wow, 20 do 100, 17 do 100, pro NATO, pro EU. Tak akože fakt. Lebo
nás to tiež prekvapí.
Lebo v realite som ochotný veľmi výrazne to spochybniť. Dokonca som, čiže možno keby ste to troška ešte viacej vysvetlili, je to určitá metodológia, ale predsa len, že akože akého dôvodu ste došli na to, že slovenská politická scéna je na tom tak dobre, lebo mám o tom extrémne pochybnosti, ak mám byť úprimný. Ďakujem.
Maybe let's start with Jonas and Patrick on the question of the disinformation campaigns led by Russian versus domestic actors or foreign versus domestic actors.
Okay, yeah, so I will start. I will just mention briefly that when we were looking into resilience of information space, like this disinformation ecosystem aspect of disinformation was only one of the categories that equally important for us was like the quality of journalism, media coverage, and things like that, because I think that if you are thinking about disinformation, you cannot think about it in a vacuum, that you have to kind of take into account like the overall structure and situation in the information space. Nevertheless, like speaking, I think that's like very important question, because like disinformation, this is like the tool which can be used by anyone. It's not kind of assigned to any particular actor. And I would actually argue that in Czech Republic we definitely can see both. I think that I would remind like the case of Verbětice and like very kind of consistent attempts and like concentrated attempts of let's say Russian media and Russian sources to let's say to undermine the official let's say official interpretations of events. At the same time, with worsening pandemic situation, we once again are seeing a lot of, let's say, disinformation efforts related to, let's say, the related vaccination and anti-pandemic, let's say, measures that are taken by government, also on some practical steps. And what we could see during elections, actually one of the strongest. And now we can put a question mark here, like, should we talk about it in the terms of disinformation campaign, while we are having a very negative communication about the pirate party from Mr. Andrej Babiš and from Hnutí Ano, which is kind of using negative motions and kind of thriving on polarizing issues. So basically, to turn it around a bit, maybe like I would not necessarily focus solely on like disinformation campaigns, like using the lies to manipulate, but to put it in the broader context, let's say quality of debate and like quality of the debate and quality of media in Czech Republic. Because again, as I said, like this kind of example, like Mr. Babiš, it's quite difficult to say whether the thing that he was spreading about, pirate party, some of them, like very minor thing, flies, but majority of them is kind of utilizing the polarizing symbols in order to manipulate it. So I would actually broaden the scope, and we unfortunately can see that quite a lot of actors are using this kind of tactics in our current environment.
Okay, so well, in Hungary, as I mentioned shortly, you see a mostly internally driven sort of disinformation environment. So we basically have a government which has been using anti-EU disinformation narratives in domestic politics to broaden or maintain their popularity for years now. Basically, it's been aggravating constantly since the start of the migration crisis in 2015. And they have a very, either directly or indirectly controlled sort of media empire that includes the public broadcaster, that includes over 500 other media outlets that basically are there simply to repeat governmental messages. So in this sense, this is mostly top-driven in Hungary. And while actually there are pro-Kremlin and pro-Beijing French portals in Hungary, and they have their own niche in the disinformation space in Hungary. For instance, mostly pro-government media are not going to say that the referendum in Crimea was completely legal and legitimate. These fringe sites are there to say that. But in terms of Russia and China, when you look through the contents in pro-government media, all you will see is how beneficial economic cooperation is with those two countries. There is no or barely any content that says that, well, yeah, Russia might be a threat or China might be a threat in many ways. And you even see narratives that basically scold the European Union for not, mending its relation with Russia or for, attacking China. These are coming from the government as well. Yeah.
When it comes to Slovakia, one thing that we've observed over the years, since really monitoring the disinformation since 2015 in our country, is that in the past, the disinformation has been really coming from the abroad, but increasingly, especially in the past few years, the disinformation has been mainstreamized, as it was told. More and more politicians are using actively disinformation to eventually appeal to their voters, because Slovaks are really very much conspiracy prone and believe various disinformation, also due to the fact that more and more politicians and various public representatives are using them in order to appeal to them. it's very hard thus to say, you know, like who wins, who's more influential, because it eventually differs from topic to topic, you know, like shutdown of MH17 or annexation of Crimea. This is definitely going to be something that is going to be driven by the Kremlin. You know, Sputnik V attacking our State Institute for the Drug Control. That was driven by them, but of course then a lot of domestic political representatives jumped on this fact and supported it internally. But then you have various domestic politicians who are spreading conspiracy theories about COVID, refusing to wear masks, and that is just further amplified by these disinformation pro-Kremlin websites that point out that, look, we have these political leaders that eventually agree with us and are the voice of the reason within the Slovak public political landscape or information landscape. So yeah, it's very hard to say because it's really, it depends from topic to topic. One thing that is for sure is that you have more disinformation outlets that are popping every single day, that are increasing from year to year. When we started to monitor the disinformation landscape, you know, the list of conspirators websites was around 50-60 pages. Now it's over 200 pages. Globsec online monitors over 1,700 problematic websites. And more are increasing. What is really problematic, and it was said both by Jonas and most of the speakers, is that we need to set some kind of like a political culture, which is definitely going to be very hard, so that the politicians themselves are going to limit the spread and the use of misinformation, disinformation when it comes to communicating with the public.
No a teraz k tej metodologickej otázke. Tu si treba uvedomiť, že my sme si nevypracovali akože tieto dáta na základe nejakej našej intuície, ale my máme veľmi presný systém na to, akým spôsobom meriame jednak vplyv politických strán za 6-ročné obdobie a jednak voči akým entitám. Čiže naša analýza politického prostredia sa zameriava na správanie politických aktérov alebo komentovanie politického diania voči EÚ, NATO a Rusku a Číne, čiže voči týmto 4 entitám. A teraz my sme potrebovali vytvoriť systém, ktorý by nuanciami dokázal reflektovať fakt, že nie každý politický aktér je rovnako vplyvný na formovanie zahraničnej politiky. Vychádzali sme z kompetencií jednotlivých strán, to znamená, že vládna strana má väčšie kompetencie formovať zahraničnú politiku, ako má napríklad iba parlamentná strana. Prezident má väčšie právomoci formovať zahraničnú politiku, ako má parlamentná strana. V našom výskume sme ale zahrňali iba parlamentné strany. To znamená, že neparlamentné subjekty nie sú súčasťou. Parlamentné sú súčasťou, ale vo vytvorení bodového hodnotenia vplyvu jednotlivých strán má parlamentná strana menšie skóre ako vládna strana z týchto pochopiteľných príčin, čo som povedala. A už Dominika vlastne spomínala, že my sme spozorovali veľmi zaujímavú vec, a to je tá, že ako náhle sa parlamentná strana stane vládnou stranou, tak ich retorika voči EÚ a NATO sa stáva ako keby z nejakého hľadiska strategickej komunikácie kvalitnejšou a menej populistickou. Čiže v tých hodnoteniach nám jednoducho vyšlo, že tie vládne strany sú relatívne ako fajn voči komunikácii, čo sa bavíme o EÚ a NATO. A zároveň máme množstvo strán, ktoré nie sú úplne ako keby pročínske a proruské. Hej, mali sme, toto bol prípad SNS, tam bola akože samozrejme veľká orientácia na Rusko, ale zároveň v hodnotení tej danej krajiny sme nenašli úplne ako keby antieurópsky sentiment. A preto tam vzniká tá ako keby zraniteľnosť práve iba skôr v orientácii na Rusko. Môžem spomenúť ďalšie príklady. SAS, podľa mňa typická strana, ktorá dá sa považovať chvíľami za euroskeptickú. Toto je niečo, čo už ako keby v jej prejave ako vládnej strany úplne nevidíme. Ten istý ako keby shift sme spozorovali aj pri Sme rodina. Akože tam vyslovene sme videli, že boli snahy Sme rodina sa spájať s Marine Le Pen ešte pred voľbami a tak ďalej. Ale odkedy sa Sme rodina stala vládnou stranou, tak ako keby tento jej antisystémový rozmer sa oveľa viacej zmiernil. A potom si musíme uvedomiť, že vlastne za posledných 6 rokov my sme tu mali hráčov ako Andrej Kiska, teraz Zuzana Čaputová, ktorí nikdy nespochybňovali naše členstvo v EÚ alebo NATO. A nielen, že ho nespochybňovali, ale aktívne jeho výhody komunikujú smerom k občanom. To isté sa týka vlastne aj ministra Lajčáka a teraz ministra Korčoka alebo aj ministra Naďa, hej. Čiže tie najvýraznejšie figúry slovenskej politickej scény, ktoré majú reálne šancu formovať našu zahraničnú politiku, to robia v podstate veľmi dobre a musím povedať, že našli by sme príklady z okolitých krajín, kde to takto nemajú. Takže preto nám vyšlo toto skôr akože takýmto spôsobom relatívne dobre. S tým, že samozrejme hodnotili sme aj strany, ako sú Kotlebovci. Hej, hodnotili sme ich, ale oni jednoducho, hoci majú veľký vplyv podľa mňa na formovanie nejakého vnútroštátneho diskurzu, oni reálne neovplyvňujú ako keby našu zahraničnú politiku. Hej, zatiaľ, hej. Takže preto. Asi takto by som to, neviem, či chcete vy ešte niečo k tomu dodať. Ale samozrejme tá metodológia je potom k dispozícii.
Jasné, lebo hej, tam to vychádza tak, že strany, ktoré sú, keď sú pri moci, tak sú relatívne
umiernené.
Menej populistické, ale to len ukazuje na tom, aké sú ideologicky vyprázdnené a tam tá podľa mňa zraniteľnosť spočíva aj v tom, že jednoducho hovoria to, čo ich volič akurát v tom čase chce počuť. Čiže to, či sú naozaj pro EÚ a pro NATO, je
otázne
na ďalšiu diskusiu.
Jasné.
Ale chápem, jasné.
A zároveň je to len ako keby, zároveň je to obrázok posledných 6 rokov a keby teraz ako prišla iná vláda, tak samozrejme, že ten obrázok už by bol ako úplne iný. No.
I think that Pavel Štrba has a question.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Hopefully you can hear me well.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, thanks. So I have two questions. One is general one. What is the main difference between Russia and China in their approach towards getting influence in these countries? If you can be more specific, you mentioned the universities in case of Hungary and China, but can you be a little more concrete? And the question about Slovakia, among our vulnerabilities, you mentioned the pro-Kremlin actors in Slovakia. Can you name them? Is it I don't know? Are there any names which were coming up more often than others? Is it Mr. Blaha? Is it Mr. Chandrabusky? Or is it you meant pro-Russian media in general? If you can understand my questions, hopefully. Thanks.
Yes. Thank you. So we can start with Jonas and Patrick first, and then we can answer the Slovak question.
Yeah, okay, so I mean, like, in the Czech case, I would like highlight like two areas, like first the political one and second the information one. Like, and in the political one, you probably can see that, or like for obvious reason, like why the Russia is quite known actor with like very kind of clearly defined like ideological, let's say ideological, historical, and other points. Like for Czech Republic, the China was something completely unknown that kind of came into region, and the political representative has to kind of find new ways how to deal with that. So in that sense, we could see that China was trying to very much kind of leverage the Czech economic situation, try to promise new investments, and present itself as kind of reliable economic partner, which is kind of able to do let's say kind of reasonable business without complicated issues with politics, which of course it's extremely appealing. I think to no matter like politicians or no matter party, especially when we are considering that, let's say these things started, let's say this communication started at a time when, let's say back in 2013, 2014, when still the Czech Republic suffered like the consequences of the financial crisis from 2000, 2008. So we can see that there is like different emphasis on different areas. And in information space, while I would argue that for the Russia there was like main focus was put on the on distorting the information space on creating the chaos in the information space in China. Also, due to the fact that this country is not that well known, we are seeing the the attempts to take control over the narrative, basically to influence the people, a very narrow group of experts who are actually creating the public image of the China and try to use their power to manipulate this image to kind of look actually positive. Of course, after the very I think like spectacular failure of Chinese influence operations in Czech Republic, we could see whether this thing will kind of develop in certain way, but definitely for the period of our research, that's where the differences we see.
Yeah, I'd say the situation in Hungary regarding China was vastly similar. The Czech experience is still China mostly tried to make itself look like as not just a stable economic partner, but as a country that could bring additional prosperity to Hungary. So already in around 2011, when the Hungarian economic situation was relatively perilous still, there were promises of considerable Chinese investments, for instance, into the Hungarian state airlines, which have since been disbanded, so it never materialized. The main difference compared to the Czech Republic is that in Hungary there are no discussions about numerous Chinese promises not having been realized at all. And the government just continues to emphasize the importance of working with China economically. And you can see the result in, for instance, the Budapest Railway, which is financed by a Chinese credit line, built mostly by Chinese companies, although there is a Hungarian member of the consortium. So it will, in the end, benefit China mostly, but there are no discussions about it. And yeah, I would also mention that China's relationship with the European Union is still, I would say, not as conflictual as the European Union's relationship with Russia. So in terms of threat perception, still a bit in the background in Hungary. Certainly there are less independent discussion also about China and what sort of threat China is to Hungary. Also, when we were talking with experts about specific methods of influencing, they mentioned that China is building more on developing lower level people-to-people contracts. For instance, through the Confucius Institute or these sort of locally organized Chinese music nights and things like that. And the last thing I would mention in terms of China's influencing attempts in Hungary is that while I would say that behind the sort of ideas promoted by the Russian regime, there might be genuine supporters. For instance, in Hungary, if they talk about the so-called child protection law, which is an anti-LGBTQ law, there is genuine support behind it in Hungary in some cases, while, for instance, the ideas of the Chinese regime and communism are not nowhere near as popular. So China cannot really enjoy this sort of ideological influence in Hungary at least.
Thanks, Patrick. Katka?
So the biggest difference between the Chinese and Kremlin influence in Slovakia is the fact that the Kremlin has a lot of background and has a lot of common, let's say, or alleged historical events or the alleged pan-Slavic unity that it can build upon. It has been present here for decades. So you have a lot of pro-Kremlin, pro-Russian actors that actively spread Russian propaganda and their disinformation. The biggest difference when it comes to China is that their goals are more long-term. They have this long-term vision, and they do not need to have, results in 1 month, in 1 year. They have a long-term strategic vision that they gradually build upon. They build upon the pool of economic investments in the country, of economic cooperation between the countries. The Chinese influence is stemming or is successful because there's a huge widespread lack of awareness, not only in Slovakia but wider region of it. You have throughout the years, Slovaks as ordinary citizens, but also public institutions are more aware to Kremlin's activities within the region, within the country, while China has been for a very long time overlooked. So this is something that we need to, actively start looking into, and more research needs to be done in this sphere. Chinese, in comparison to Russians, they do not have such a developed information network and, let's say, impact when it comes to information landscape. However, what we've observed during the COVID pandemic is that certain narratives promoting Chinese vaccination or mask diplomacy, promoting how China has been helping Slovakia and other European countries during the COVID pandemic has been actively spread by pro-Kremlin networks. So you've seen active cooperation of pro-Kremlin actors with pro-Chinese actors. Another thing, they have been very successful in conducting a PR when it comes to their vaccine and mass diplomacy and help during the pandemic. And as it was said by both Jonas and Patrick, Confucius Institutes are very important tools of their influence, and during which they build people-to-people relations, which then eventually can snowball over the years to more important connections. So I would end here.
Okay, and when it comes to pro-Kremlin actors, maybe also just to clarify, also for the purposes of this study, we distinguish between pro-Russian actors and actors acting according to pro-Kremlin interests. So pro-Russian are those actors who are openly loving Russia without any constructive counter ideas or constructive ideas. And pro-Kremlin actors are, according to our definition, those who consistently undermine democratic institutions, consistently try to polarize society on divisive issues, consistently undermine our membership in Euro-Atlantic structures. So, according to this definition, pro-Kremlin actors from the political scene are, can indeed be Blaha, Kotleba and his party, or the members of today's Republika. Also now, not in the parliament, Andrej Danko, who's undermining our membership in Euro-Atlantic structures. And from the information landscape, those would be obviously all the outlets you can find on konspiratory.sk, all the hlavné správy and Zemaveks, because they are indeed pushing forward these narratives. So in short, this would be my answer.
Yeah. But also, Kremlin is also very effective in utilizing civil society organization as veterans or anti-fascist, soldiers, in order to foster this narratives that the Russians were the ones that helped us, that freed Slovakia, and they were the only foreign countries that helped liberated Slovakia. So this is something that is annually being done at various historical anniversaries.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that. Do you have any questions? More questions or?
Yep.
Okay.
I would have one last question for Patrick and Jonas.
Okay.
Because in Czech Republic, do you expect, and it was mentioned a bit, but do you expect any real changes with the new government in terms of vulnerability problems and so on? And also for Patrick, in case that there will be a change of the government in Hungary, which of course might not happen, but it maybe. Do you expect any changes in this field?
Yeah, well, so I would allow myself to be very cautiously optimistic about it, and for about these positive changes, and for, let's say, two reasons. The first reason is that at this point we have the coalition of parties who are kind of having not only kind of clearly declared that they kind of want to be invested in the area of security and foreign policy, but we also have people present in the parliament, but also in the, let's say, probably in the ministries. Still don't know, still government is forming, but still see. But we have the people who were invested in this area already before, so we might expect that they will try to kind of deliver on this. And secondly, the second reason for this optimism is the energy in the state institutions, because basically the things I was hearing from also within the framework of this project, but more generally, was that despite the fact that there is a lot of, let's say, documents prepared, there is like a lot of ideas present, the people from the state institutions are not feeling the political backing and are, let's say, therefore, are cautious with pursuing these ideas further. Just to give you one example, like national strategy against hybrid influences, like one of the pillars of this effort. And I would suspect that now, when we will have a new government that is more sympathetic, those people in the institution become more active to try to pursue this agenda, which is actually already there present. They don't have to start from the scratch, but they'll start to be active in Peru. However, at the same time, we will have, of course, like the security is not for free, so there will be like need of new resources, and of course we are not in the greatest state with the COVID and needed economic recovery and so on. Yeah. So we will see how the new government will be able to handle it, and we also see that's again like particularly interesting for me. As you saw in the presentation, like the highest problem or like highest vulnerability are public. Basically, the public is the problem, quotes basically, or more like the relation between the power and the population. And of course, this is something that needs to be, let's say, tackled more fundamentally than only by the applying for the security policy. So we will very much see how the new government will be able to build trust between the institution and society, because from my perspective, this is like ultimately the things that is kind of the key to the resilience. So, in Hungary, the 6 or 7 party opposition, depending on how you count them, they're fairly strongly pro-EU and pro-West without any very strong elements within this alliance who are against this pro-West orientation for Hungary. So what would definitely change is the rhetoric on foreign policy. It would be a pro-EU, pro-NATO rhetoric, pro-US rhetoric probably, and definitely tougher on Russia and China. But the thing is that the political messaging is the easiest part to do. In terms of immediate policy changes, I would probably say Hungary would stop vetoing EU statements condemning China if there was a change of government. The problematic parts are also numerous. Well, first of all, they would basically have to start building resilience from the ground up, because we have barely any ideas of the capabilities of the public administration and public administration staff in this sense.
have Fidesz party loyalists basically engraved on top of public institutions who would be very hard to replace without a constitutional majority. And there are also political realities. For instance, Hungary's very strong dependence on Russian natural gas, or, for instance, the loans Hungary has taken from China and from Russia that it would have to pay back, and also, you know, the large joint projects and mainly the contracts about those projects, because the opposition currently has probably no idea on what sort of conditions, what are the conditions under which they can abandon this project. So there are going to be numerous difficulties as well. I wouldn't say that everything will change from one day to the other. It would have to be a longer process.
Okay. Do you have any more questions? Maybe last one or? Okay. So thank you very much for your time. Thanks to our partners in Czech Republic, Hungary, and other countries. And have a nice day. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye, guys.